Evening, this is Stephen Brown and welcome to Rants and Raves video edition. Tonight's episode is called Honor, Dignity, Victimhood, Rock, Paper, Scissors. Okay, I'm going to talk about some anthropological speculation of mine that just occurred to me recently, so that if this is a bit disorganized, please bear with me. I'm talking about kind of cultural morphology, terms that we use in anthropology that are usually very short descriptions that say something meaningful about a culture or a subculture within a larger culture. And some of the ones that are more better known about this is, for example, the difference between shame cultures and guilt cultures, which was formulated, I believe, by Ruth Benedict many years ago. Which has to deal with how a culture enforces the rules of its society. They do it through reputation and enforce it through public shaming and such as, Japan is an archetypical culture. Or if you saw the movie Witness, among the Amish, there's a custom called shunning, where someone has transgressed and basically nobody will talk to them. Ostracism. And a guilt culture. A guilt culture is one in which the rules are internalized more. Now, of course, no culture is ever entirely one or the other, but it is a useful distinction. What is the primary method they use? Now, the distinction I wish to talk about tonight is there's a classical difference between an honor culture and a dignity culture. Honor cultures are ones in which a person's status depends on his honor and being touchy about it. This is a culture of dueling and feuding and such. Let's see, I'm sure you could recall any number of things. Of course, again, Japan was classically an honor culture there, where if your honor was besmirched, you had to avenge it, or you had to commit seppuku in some way as to restore your honor. Now, again, the example of Japan, of course, shows that honor cultures can be quite a high level. I mean, this was an extremely advanced civilization with an advanced state-level civilization and such. But in the West, specifically, we came up with something we call a dignity culture. And this, again, it goes back a ways. It is very specifically Judeo-Christian. It's the idea that you have an intrinsic worth which you may surrender, but which cannot be taken from you. And as I've been thinking about this over the past few days, since this idea, which I will reveal to you presently, occurred to me, was that a dignity culture is necessary for something like a modern work environment. Remember, if you're working with a whole lot of other people, you're probably together a lot. There's a lot of personal interaction with all the occasion for friction, that because they're strangers. They're not kin to you. They're generally not your clan or your kin. You have to take orders from a supervisor. You have to take criticism. All of these, in an honor culture, all of these things are potential instances of being offended. And let me tell you, in an honor culture, if you read about the history of, say, medieval to late Renaissance Spain or something, you find people can be pretty touchy. They can be as touchy as any PC idiot about their personal honor and such. Your personal honor may involve things like your truthfulness. Look up giving the lie to something. It's an expression right now, but it used to mean something a great deal more serious. It used to mean things like, if you're calling me a liar, then we've got to go to a place where one of us will not return from, kind of thing. And there was a very elaborate code about it. It said you could give the lie conditional. If anyone sayest that I ran at the Battle of Albuherra, then he liest in his throat. And there were distinctions. You lie in your beard, you lie in your teeth, you lie in your throat. That's the kind of elaborateness that comes in honor cultures. Dignity cultures, well, it's hard to see because, of course, we're so close to them. We are a dignity culture, by and large. Now, we do have, within our society, honor cultures. The urban, inner city, urban sorts of culture, very often honor cultures there. Where did the term "he disrespected me" come from? And interestingly, how it has come into common parlance these days. I mean, it started out, it was bad English that we just sort of made fun of, but it turns out it's a neologism and has been used. He disrespected me. That's a term that just screams honor culture. Now, what I wanted to get to here was we appear to have come up with something new in modern society, and it's odd, and it's victim culture. In an honor culture, your status comes from a number of things, and it applies to your family, but behind it all is the willingness of touchy men to fight over their honor, their personal honor, and their family honor. When I was teaching in Saudi Arabia, I remember I was cautioned by a supervisor one time about the stickiness of these things. A few years before I got there at the Industrial Training Center, there had been one student had insulted another student's clan, which resulted in a riot in the parking lot in which knives got pulled, people got killed. The aftermath of that was there were beheadings in that parking lot in punishment. And let me tell you something, it feels kind of weird knowing that you're parking on a spot where a head rolled. But at any rate, as I say, honor, dignity. Dignity cultures are something else. In a dignity culture, you are supposed to let insults roll off your back. As Doc Holliday said in Tombstone, "Sir, to be insulted, I would first have to value your opinion." That's a commendable attitude. You can have dignity on this, and in a dignity culture, honor, it still exists, but it takes on a different meaning. And the best definition ever was by Walter Lippmann, who said, "A man has honor when he adheres to a code of conduct, when it is unpopular, unprofitable, or dangerous to do so." Now, consider this. Who do we know, who do we think of that has honor in this society? Well, your humble servant is a journalist as well as an anthropologist. What do we think of a journalist who goes to jail for contempt of court for refusing to reveal his sources, if it's really something of that sort? Now, he's an honorable man. I think, can we all agree on that? I mean, given that the source is, say, a whistleblower against corrupt government or something like that, and rather than a mafioso, or even in those conditions, it could be, no, I'm not going to rat him out because he'll be killed. He has honor. Now, notice something about this. It has nothing to do with fighting. It has to do with resisting authority when it is unjust, we say. So a man can have honor without being a fighting man. Little guy with no skills who can stand up and say, "Do what you will," has honor. But this is rather it is honor, but it's a bit of a new twist on it from an honor culture in which we can caricature about, or some of the more pathological aspects of honor culture, such as a samurai with his sword, like that, practice an art called iai, or batojutsu, where drawing quickly and slashing, and he would do that if somebody in a crowd accidentally banged the scabbard of his sword. Whoosh, oops, there go your you've been hamstringed, guy. Well, here, listen, the cane shop is down the road. Again, in our culture, we'd say, "Excuse me." Say, "Okay, sure, that's fine." Now, as I say, honor is for people who either are fighting men or are related to fighting men, have fighting men in their clan. Dignity is for everybody who can summon the courage to act with dignity when the occasion demands. But now we have something which has emerged recently, which we are beginning to call a victim culture. And this is something very, very odd indeed. This is where your status depends on not even wrongs that you have personally suffered, but historical wrongs that your group has suffered. Oh gosh, within my lifetime, for example, homosexual acts could be punished by sending you to prison, where you'd be locked in with a bunch of other dudes. As somebody said, Lenny Bruce said, yeah, right, like that's punishment. Well, in fact it is, because prisons are not very hospitable towards gays. You could be a previously oppressed minority. If your ancestors were slaves, then gosh Rudy, you have some sort of status in that you are presumed to be cruelly oppressed to this day. Put a pin in that. It marks something. It could be, anything. It's gotten to the point where middle-class white folks are trying, either self-flagellating about, oh God, I'm descended of oppressors, therefore I'm an awful person. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Or they're trying to find an occasion of oppression in their lives. If you happen to be Irish, part like that, you say, "What? You say you were oppressed? My people were cruelly oppressed by the Sassenach for 700 years, you stupid git." Like that. Or the weirdest example ever were flaky neo-pagans who have constructed an entirely mythical historical religion there, which they have pinned to pre-European paganism. That's a witchcraft paganism, that sort of thing like that. And said, many years ago in Norman, Oklahoma, I actually saw a little pamphlet from some local flaky neo-pagans who were in the process of taking over the local Unitarian church facilities, which said, "Never again, the burning." I mean, can you imagine that? And to be fair, I've also seen, if anybody remembers those little fundamentalist Christian pamphlets that they used to hang out or something like that, where they were swearing up and down that the Inquisition was going to come back and they were going to start racking Protestant heretics again, or something of that sort, like that. And when I say, well, in fact, people who take their Christianity seriously are mocked and derided in this society and such, and I hesitate to call it persecution, but life is definitely made hot for them if, for example, they don't want to bake a cake for a transgender reveal or whatever the hell the newest thing is. Yes, they can suffer a bit for it, but folks, it is not like being racked and burned at the stake. I mean, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But at any rate, so what the heck is this thing? How did it come about, this victimhood culture? I mean, you have to step back a bit and look at it in historical context to realize how seriously weird this is, and how weird it is that it has been embraced by the intelligentsia about this. The academics, the people that Eric Hoffer called the scribe class, have historically never been on the side of the downtrodden. They have always identified with the ruling class. Well, as you've seen in my series on ruling class crisis, this is sort of true today. Excuse me, it is entirely true today. They identify as a ruling class. They're as junior members of a ruling class, which is historically normal. That's what they do. But it's the identification of themselves also with victimhood. They would deny fervently that they are part of a ruling class. No, we're fighting the power. Yeah, rah. They are not. They are attempting to be the power. And they're doing this, as I pointed out in the third episode of Ruling Class Crisis, that they are exercising their power in ways that are capricious and arbitrary just to prove that they are, just basically because they can. Call me je, or I'll ruin your career. So let's look at some of the characteristics of victimhood and victim culture. Well, to begin with, if you are a victim, you need a victimizer. It has to be somebody's fault. There has to be somebody, and they have a pretty good idea who it is, aka thee and me, who their victimizer is and whose fault it is. Just as an aside, what was it, 2 generations ago? It was back in the 50s, I think, we started hearing the term, he's a victim of society, and that's why he jacked my car. If it has to be somebody's fault, Eric Hoffer said, people welcome a good excuse more than they welcome a good opportunity. Why isn't life going the way I want it to go? Even, why I got the college degree, why do I have a mountain of debt and I'm not, and I'm not rolling in money? It has to be a victimizer. It can't be, say, a tragic reality. What was that thing I objected to the other day? Somebody said X many people die of lack of medical insurance. Nobody dies of lack of medical insurance. They die of specific diseases and conditions. Now, while it is true that medical treatment might extend their lives, might even save their lives for quite some time to come, that's not why they die. You die of cancer. You don't die because your insurance policy was canceled or you can't afford one or something like that. Insurance is a good thing. Medical care is a good thing. I think I was 5 years old. I damn near died of measles. Merely having a warm house with clean water available all the time may have been a significant factor in the fact that I'm not dead. I'm here. The other thing about this, and this is the significant thing about victimhood culture, is it gives you a license to insult with impunity. Now, this is something that could not happen in an honor culture because somebody would very politely offer to accompany you to a place from which only one of you would return, usually very courteously, although he might leave his gloves in your face. But victim status gives you a license to insult people. And furthermore, in a dignity culture, you're supposed to let the insults roll off your back or laugh at them or something. And remember Doc Holliday. Now, but remember something else about Doc Holliday. The kind of insults that they use, that you're entitled to use as a victim, and they are like white supremacist, fascist, fill in the blank dash phobe, racist, Nazi, anything. Put a pin in Nazi. They're not content with merely wielding these insults. The insults have to escalate in kind, and If you have ever had the misfortune of living with someone who liked to needle you, who would probe until they found something that set you off, no matter how patient you were, they'd look for something that would trigger you. Oh God, that was a Freudian slip. Triggered, of course. It fits in with this. I'm triggered. Yeah, I get kind of triggered when somebody calls me a Nazi too. You know why? Because I've been to a concentration camp. In fact, more than one. But I've toured Auschwitz. I don't like being called a Nazi. In fact, yeah. Never mind. How about literal Nazi, which, if you think about that for a second, if somebody says literal Nazi, they're saying, it's semantically absurd. You're saying he's, like you're saying literally Hitler. What? Hitler's still alive? Oh, he's a literal Nazi. What? You mean he wears a swastika and he goes to meetings of the National Socialist German Workers' Party and endorses the platform? No, there are such people, by the way. Although most of our literal Nazis who actually wear swastikas and go to rallies like that probably have no real idea of, probably could not quote any particular plank of the original National Socialist German Workers' Party. But at any rate, I say, the ability, if you're a victim, you can insult with impunity. And you can only get away with that in a dignity culture. Furthermore, you can escalate the insults. Furthermore, it doesn't work two ways. You can't insult them back. In fact, they get positively indignant, even surprised. Take that as a special case circumstance. Of course, we've been slinging insults at each other as long as there have been politics. And, of course, I'm scarcely the first person to note that politics has become largely tribal. Do you know that experiment they do every now and again? They'll go out on the street and they'll find a liberal and they'll quote something about, we've got to stop illegal immigration. Illegal immigrations are a plague on our society. Yeah, that's one of them right-wing fascists. No, actually, that was Barack Obama a few years ago. I think, what does that mean? Does it mean, it means they're tribal. They're identifying with a tribe. There are certain beliefs that are identified with a tribe, and one of them, of course, is victimhood. There's the victim tribe. The victim tribe, of course, strives for support from historically victimized peoples like that, no matter how well they're doing today, for God's sake. And basically, like everybody today is, every identified group of people, by and large, mostly are, some are doing well, some aren't so doing well, because when it comes down to it, we still have a largely individualist, economically individualist society. We probably don't have time to go into that. By economically individualist, I mean that your culture holds that you can achieve success by yourself through your hard work, thrift, good luck, winning the lottery, whatever, like that. But you are not obligated to drag a large extended family behind you. That, by the way, is still a problem in some of our minority cultures. I can't call them subcultures because they were here before us, among the Indian tribes. If any given one of them has a windfall, that windfall has to be distributed around a large extended family network and such. Virtually the only way someone who is still identifies as tribal, can achieve a success is by assimilation, is to a large extent by distancing themselves from their culture, and that is an ongoing tragedy, one of those tragedies which is just life. It's nobody's fault, folks. That sort of thing was determined way before you were born, and there doesn't appear to be an alternative in sight. So, in other words, you have to transition from an honor culture to a dignity culture and be in the position of a dishonorable person or perhaps only a misbehaving relative. Now, another characteristics of victim cultures is you don't have to be held to the same standards as other people. And it said a great deal of what, say, the dominant WASP culture would regard as misconduct is excused because you're a victim. How could you help yourself? This is one of the worst aspects of an essentially ugly kind of culture, is that it denies agency to people. It says you are the product of your culture and only of your culture. There is nothing of free will about this. And, which, well, I could say, well, okay, screw you. Go ahead and believe that, and you'll be a loser all your life. The trouble is they apply it to you too. And they said you are a rat-fink oppressor because you're white, because you had an education, because you had parents who read to you. Heard that one recently. So your destiny is to be an oppressor always and forever. Look at another thing about it, the victimhood thing. The victimhood relies on an oppressed past. An honor culture, even a dignity culture, creates myths, stories of a heroic past. What did Eric Hoffer say about this? He said, "It is said, happy the country that has no history. But when a Hitler or a Stalin bestrides the world, woe to that people who do not feel the blood of mighty ancestors throbbing in their veins." Now, in a dignity culture, we could say your dignity is yours. It has nothing to do with your ancestors. But of course, we do. We do think of our heroic ancestors. It is kind of fun to think about. Well, I came from a noble people. Okay, well, that doesn't have the same weight it does in an honor culture, but it's still something we kind of like to think of. And let's face it, it's a whole lot better than thinking of, no, my ancestors were, mudfoot oppressed peasants back to the beginning of time. No, what a bummer. Another thing about victimhood culture is, and I remember I said stick a pin in that, you can't ever admit that things have changed or improved. The claims of how crippling and debilitating minority status in this country do not admit of any kind of change like that. Yes, there are cultures which have lagged. Thomas Sowell said something about African Americans. He said, but he said it within the context of dignity. He said, if we have not come as far as some other groups, no one has had as far to come. That's a statement that reeks of dignity, which is a good thing to have in mind if in fact your culture is identifiable, if you can't get rid of the signs, if there's a physiognomy that identifies you as coming from the same group as a certain culture, and that group happens to have the culture inculcates poor work habits and has a high crime rate. Sorry, that's a fact of life, folks, and it's not fair, it just is. What did a friend of mine, Mark McYoung, likes to say, that the skills necessary to survive in poverty are not the same skills that it takes to get out of poverty. A man who experienced situational poverty in his youth. Now, culture has a lot of things. Now, when you start talking about culture and the effects of cultural institutions and traditions which do not militate towards success, to say the least, like that. Let's use a foreign culture just so we're on less dangerous ground here. Saudi Arabia, where I worked for a year, is an honor culture and a slave culture. Yes, they're a modern country. They abolished slavery, and I think in 1967. And no, I'm quite sure that some of my students were the children of slave mothers. People have seen slave auctions. People I knew personally saw slave auctions as late as the 1980s. And one time, some of my students flat out asked me, "Teacher, what do you call a man who can be sold?" He's a slave. Yeah, and at one point when I was asking about the headsman, the guy who chops off heads Friday in the Chop Square outside the mosque after services, is a Sudanese. He has to be someone outside of the honor network, or else the act of being an executioner would cause a blood feud. And my student said, "Oh yes, teacher, that's right. He's a slave." Oh, okay. So, by the way, if you want to ask me, what do I know about slavery? Probably more than you. Now, the thing about this is victimhood culture. A victim, we've talked about honor culture, dignity culture, and victimhood culture. One reason why the victimhood culture is so pernicious is a victim can have neither honor nor dignity. Now, does that mean someone who's in prison is stripped of his dignity? No. It is about how he reacts to it. Cuban dissident Armando Valladares was imprisoned for 22 years, and at one place, I think he was at the bottom of a prison shaft, a long shaft, where they dumped latrine buckets down on him from a great height. If you can ever imagine a more undignified situation, I'd really like to hear about it. Actually, no, I wouldn't. But his dignity remained intact. If you read his book, that's Armando Valladares, V-A-A-Y or L-L-A-R-E-S. It's amazing. The guy is like, he's like if we were to lose Christianity and to have gods again, he would be the god of dignity. Because he never accepted being a victim. He regarded his situation as either local and temporary or irrelevant to his dignity. Someone who is proclaiming their victimhood cannot have that. It doesn't happen. They have neither honor nor dignity, which is why they impress us as being kind of creepy, to tell you the absolute truth. So let me wrap this up with something I have considered only recently about this. Rock, paper, scissors. To some extent, we say dignity culture supersedes honor culture. But victim culture is destroying, or it is certainly damaging, dignity culture. It takes away your dignity. It denies dignity in some way. So what happens? Are we going to become solely a victim culture with divided up, rather like the old medieval cultures, only set on their heads, the peasants on top? To some degree, that is what the communist countries did. Remember, one of the weird things about the Soviet Union is you had to be able to prove your proletarian descent. That if you had any bourgeois or, God forbid, aristocratic ancestry, I mean, and ancestors long dead, I mean, not how you were raised there, but you were definitely in a disadvantaged position. Today, how many people are claiming to be from disadvantaged backgrounds? Or not. I've used well, I've used other examples, but more recently, this young lady, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, or as a friend of mine, Robert Giuliano, is the author, Alexandra Occasional Cortex, as just merely the latest of a number of people who have tried to claim a poor background of some sort like that. Oh, back when I was in the bodega, back from the Bronx. Well, one, not all of the Bronx is a bad place. Quite a lot of it is, quite a vital and exciting place. But two, she left the Bronx when she was, what, 5, something? She lived there for a very short period of her life and was raised in a neighborhood where, where you have $1 million homes. She was not poor or disadvantaged. She went to Tony schools. She graduated from some perfectly decent schools with admittedly a dumbed down curriculum, but that's a problem all of us have these days. What is this? Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt was a patrician through and through, and furthermore, he was of the Dutch ascendancy, the old New York Dutch ascendancy, which is even older than the Anglo-Saxon ascendancy. He championed the cause of the poor, but he never pretended to be one of them. It probably would have irritated the heck out of them, irritated the heck, among other things, among the poor that he championed there, nobody would ever have been seen with a cigarette holder, for example. That is sort of an upper class affectation, and it's one that he never got rid of. Yeah, sure, I'm a patrician. Yeah, I grew up rich. Yeah, this is the sense of noblesse oblige he had, the idea that you have to pay for your privileges, that is actually a descendant of our old honor culture. Now, so rock, paper, scissors. Scissors. If dignity culture supersedes honor culture and victimhood culture is superseding or destroying dignity culture, what happens? Is it possible, rock, scissors, that what happens in response, because quite frankly we can't maintain a civilization such as ours with a victimhood culture. It will either destroy it or it will disappear. Could it be that the response comes back to honor culture? And now, remember I told you to stick a pin in Nazi. The notion that their privilege of insulting extends to escalating the insults to call you a Nazi. They've called you a racist. I'm not a racist. Oh, that just proves you're a racist. You're a white supremacist. Oh, give me a freaking break. They're looking for something that really, really does bother you and gets under your skin. So what do you do when it does? Now, one thing is to erupt in rage. Another might be to go very cool and say, I would like an apology for that. Nah, it's not forthcoming. All right, we'll deal with this later. How will we deal with it later? How will we deal with this constant barrage of insult? Insulting back? There's that, and there's a certain amount of satisfaction. The problem is that unless we find something that gets under their skin, it's not going to be very satisfactory. Could it be that honor culture destroys victimhood culture? A man who has honor, the old-fashioned idea of honor, will despise victims. People who believe themselves to be victims, who make no attempt to escape the victim status, who are not defiant in their victimhood but proud of their victimhood. Any man with honor or dignity that will despise someone like that. What form that will take, we don't know. But perhaps that is a discussion for another time. But I would just like you to think about that. Rock, paper, scissors. Honor, dignity, victimhood. This is Stephen Brown, Rants and Raves. Good morning.